You framed me. The words tore through my mind, raw and disbelieving, even as Mr. Sterling, the gallery director, his face a mask of pale fury, spat out his accusation. His voice, usually so composed, was tight, a barely controlled tremor of rage lacing every syllable as he pointed a trembling finger directly at me. Security guards, their expressions grim and unyielding, flanked him, effectively sealing off the exit to the main hall. He told me, his voice cutting through the sudden ringing silence of the grand space. How could I do it? That piece, he choked out, that piece was $250,000. I just stared, my own reflection a ghostly stranger in the polished marble floor. Confusion swirled into a cold, sickening dread that gripped my chest, stealing my breath. What was he even talking about? My mind reeled. I'd been working late, meticulously cataloging new arrivals in the quiet solitude of the archive room, completely alone. I stammered, my voice sounding weak and distant even to my own ears, that I didn't understand, asking what had happened. He snapped, stepping closer, his eyes narrowed into slits of accusation, telling me not to play dumb. The Calliope sculpture, he declared, his voice rising, was ruined. Smashed. And I, he emphasized with venom, was the only one with access tonight after closing. They had trusted me. Each word landed like a physical blow. Ruined? Smashed? The elegant, abstract bronze sculpture, the very centerpiece of our upcoming highly anticipated exhibition? It felt utterly impossible. My mind raced, a frantic scramble to make sense of the unthinkable, but all I could feel was the floor dropping out from beneath me. Frame. The single word screamed, a silent, deafening alarm in my head. Someone had framed me. And deep down, a sickening, insidious suspicion already began to coil in my gut, whispering a name. This wasn't mere negligence. This was something far more sinister. Something deliberate, calculated. And my quiet, meticulously ordered life was about to be violently ripped apart. My name is Mark. And perhaps just a few months before that nightmare erupted, I genuinely considered myself fortunate. As a young man just shy of 30, I'd managed to land a job that felt less like employment and more like a true calling. I was a junior curator at the prestigious Thornton Gallery, a grand institution nestled right in the beating heart of the city. It wasn't just any gallery, it was the gallery. The kind with hushed, echoing halls, ridiculously expensive, perfectly angled lighting, and art that possessed the power to make you forget to breathe, to lose yourself in beauty and history. I didn't come from wealth. My background was, let's say, solidly working class. Jeans and comfortable t-shirts were far more my natural habitat than tailored suits and $500 Italian leather shoes. But art was my undeniable passion. Ever since a transformative high school field trip had unexpectedly cracked open a new world for me, I'd obsessively devoured books on art history, haunted museums with an almost religious fervor, and filled countless sketchbooks with my own attempts to capture the world. Landing the job at the Thornton felt like I had finally, improbably, broken into a rarefied world I'd only ever admired from a respectful distance. It represented not just a paycheck but stability, a tangible opportunity, a precious chance to prove myself based purely on dedication and skill, not on who I knew or where I came from. My days were a whirlwind of absorbing activity, researching obscure artists and their often fascinating lives, assisting with the intricate layouts of upcoming exhibitions, handling incredibly delicate pieces with painstaking, almost reverent care, and occasionally, giving tours to wealthy patrons who often dripped diamonds and even vaguer artistic opinions. I loved the quiet, focused intensity of the environment, the unique, comforting smell of old canvas mingling with conservation chemicals, the distinct thrill of uncovering the hidden story behind a long-forgotten piece. My apartment was modest, my budget undeniably tight, but I possessed a profound sense of purpose. I poured every ounce of my energy and passion into my work, frequently staying late into the evening, double-checking every minute detail, ensuring everything was absolutely perfect. I was meticulous, deeply dedicated, perhaps a little too earnest and idealistic in retrospect. I genuinely believed that hard work and sincere passion were sufficient, that the hushed reverence seemingly afforded to art within those hallowed walls naturally extended to a basic respect for those who diligently cared for it. The gallery felt stable, a sanctuary where merit, albeit sometimes slowly, was eventually recognized. I felt like I was finally, carefully building something real, something lasting, brick by considered brick. Little did I know, some individuals much preferred demolition, especially if they didn't have to sully their own hands by wielding the hammer themselves. The disruption didn't begin with an explosion, but rather with a shared, knowing smirk. Or to be precise, two smirks, belonging to Blake and Chloe Thornton. Yes, Thornton. As in, the direct grandchildren of the gallery's revered founder. They were twins, probably in their mid-20s, perpetually dripping in the latest designer clothes and radiating an almost palpable aura of effortless, unearned entitlement that always managed to set my teeth on edge. Blake was tall, cultivating that kind of deliberately casual, eye-wateringly expensive look, artfully floppy hair, a perfectly tailored jacket thrown carelessly over an obscure band t-shirt, always appearing as though he just sauntered off a high-fashion magazine shoot and was acutely aware of it. Chloe was petite, impeccably styled down to the last eyelash, with sharp, assessing eyes that seemed to instantly calculate everyone's net worth, or more often, their perceived lack thereof, in a single dismissive glance, usually finding it lacking unless they were firmly ensconced within her elite, privileged circle. Their family were naturally major patrons, and Blake and Chloe treated the gallery not as a public institution, but as their personal clubhouse, a mere extension of their sprawling, opulent mansion. They'd frequently breeze in unannounced with boisterous entourages of equally privileged friends, demanding immediate access to closed sections or expecting impromptu private viewings, often rudely cutting off actual scholars or previously scheduled tour groups without a moment's hesitation or apology. Most of the long-suffering staff just swallowed their mounting annoyance and quickly complied, muttering under their breath about the family's substantial, indispensable donations whenever the twins and their retinue swept past, leaving behind a cloying trail of expensive perfume and quiet, simmering resentment. My first truly direct run-in occurred during the critical installation phase of a particularly fragile, intricate glass exhibit by a renowned contemporary artist. It was a task that required intense concentration and the most careful, delicate handling. Blake and Chloe arrived unannounced as usual, with a group of about 6 friends, all of them clearly having come from a long, very liquid lunch somewhere nearby. Their loud, inappropriate laughter echoed jarringly in the usually quiet, almost sacred wing. They loudly declared they wanted to see the new pieces now. I stepped forward, my heart sinking, trying to politely intercept them before they got too close to the active, hazardous work area. I explained, as politely but firmly as I could manage, that the area was currently closed for crucial safety reasons. Delicate, irreplaceable work was in progress, and unauthorized personnel were strictly forbidden. Blake just let out a short, dismissive laugh, a sound that grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. He told me, his voice laced with that familiar, condescending drawl they both favored when addressing staff, not to be such a job's worth, Mark. It always felt like they were tasting something deeply unpleasant whenever they pronounced my name. He added that they just wanted a quick peek, and assured me with a wave of his hand that Grandpa wouldn't mind, he promised. Chloe then added her voice, stepping a little too close, her expensive, almost suffocating perfume invading my personal space in the enclosed area. Besides, she asserted, her smile not reaching her cold eyes, they practically owned this place. A few flimsy ropes weren't going to stop them. Her tone was sharp, overtly challenging. I stood my ground, my heart pounding a little faster now but determined not to be visibly intimidated. I replied that I was sorry, Mr. Thornton, Miss Thornton, but gallery policy was unequivocally clear for everyone's safety, and most importantly for the safety of the artwork. I offered that we could certainly schedule a private viewing for them once the installation was fully complete and the area was deemed safe. Blake's smirk tightened perceptibly, morphing into a thin, displeased line. He exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible look with Chloe, a silent, unnerving communication that I couldn't decipher but that felt distinctly ominous. He clipped out a curt "fine," turning away abruptly, his entire posture radiating palpable annoyance. He added over his shoulder to have it my way. For now. They left then, trailing disgruntled murmurs and the lingering scent of their expensive fragrances behind them. But the air in their wake felt thick with their unspoken displeasure, heavier, somehow more threatening than before. It wasn't merely about being denied immediate access to the art, it was fundamentally about control, about forcefully reminding me of my designated place in their glittering world, somewhere far, far beneath them. A tight knot of profound unease settled deep in my stomach. This wasn't just typical youthful arrogance or impatient entitlement. There was a distinct, unsettling carelessness there, a fundamental, almost casual disregard for established rules and potential consequences that felt genuinely dangerous. I tried to brush it off as simply typical rich kid behavior, but a small, persistent voice deep inside me whispered that this wouldn't be the last time they aggressively pushed the boundaries. And I had absolutely no idea then how terrifyingly right that inner voice was, or just how devastatingly high the stakes would eventually become. Things didn't detonate immediately after that first tense confrontation over the glass exhibit. Instead, it was more like a slow, insidious leak, a gradual, almost imperceptible poisoning of the atmosphere whenever Blake and Chloe graced the gallery with their presence, which to my growing dismay, seemed to be increasingly often. They began to treat the hallowed halls of the gallery less like a revered museum and more like their personal, exclusive lounge, their behavior growing subtly bolder, more openly dismissive with each visit. They'd lean far too close to priceless, centuries-old paintings while snapping endless selfies, their raucous laughter echoing unervingly loud, bouncing off the high ceilings of the sacred spaces. They'd nonchalantly bring coffee cups and open water bottles into strictly restricted areas, completely ignoring the clearly posted, prominent signs explicitly prohibiting all food and drink. Once, I watched in utter, helpless horror from across the vast room as Blake casually, almost contemptuously, flicked a speck of what looked like sticky dust, or perhaps something worse from his fingers, off a delicate, irreplaceable centuries-old tapestry with his bare hand. I physically recoiled at the sight, my stomach churning with a mixture of nausea and outrage. When I later attempted to gently intervene, reminding them of the critical preservation rules with as much diplomacy and tact as I could possibly muster, I'd receive that same infuriating, dismissive wave of a hand, or worse, a pointed, cutting comment expertly disguised as a light-hearted joke. Chloe might say, for instance, with a sickeningly saccharine smile, her voice pitched just loud enough for other nearby patrons or passing staff members to clearly overhear, "Oh, Mark, always so terribly worried." She'd remind me it was art, not delicate spun glass, then pointedly ask if I didn't trust them. It was a remark expertly crafted to make me look petty, overzealous, as if I were needlessly harassing the revered founder's beloved grandchildren over absolutely nothing. It effectively undermined my already limited authority and made me increasingly hesitant to intervene further, fearing repercussions. Blake, on the other hand, preferred more subtle, deeply personal digs, often aimed with cruel precision at my less privileged background, which he seemed to find endlessly, tiresomely amusing. He once commented, while watching me meticulously adjust the specialized, expensive lighting on a particularly valuable sculpture, his tone deceptively light but his eyes sharp and mocking, that it must be nice. Nice, he elaborated, to finally be around things I could never, ever afford back home. He delivered the line as if making a completely casual, innocuous observation, but the vicious barb landed exactly as intended, making my cheeks burn with a hot, potent mixture of suppressed anger and acute embarrassment. I started noticing small, unsettling things amiss after their increasingly frequent visits, things that couldn't be easily or logically explained away. A heavy velvet rope barrier pulled slightly, noticeably askew, as if someone had carelessly ducked under it. A pristine descriptive label mysteriously, inexplicably smudged, right next to the very spot where they'd been standing and loudly joking just moments before. Once, a faint but definite scratch appeared seemingly overnight on the thick, protective plexiglass of a display case located near where Blake and his boisterous friends had been lounging and joking at an inappropriate volume the previous afternoon. Nothing major, nothing I could definitively, irrefutably prove was their direct doing, but the emerging pattern was undeniable and deeply worrying. They were systematically testing boundaries, aggressively pushing limits, clearly enjoying the inherent power imbalance and the glaringly obvious fact that no one in authority dared to properly, meaningfully discipline them. I attempted to voice my mounting, serious concerns to my direct supervisor, Amelia. She was usually supportive, understanding, and fair, but whenever the delicate subject of the Thorntons arose, her expression would instantly become strained, carefully guarded. She told me, her voice carefully neutral, avoiding my direct gaze while fiddling nervously with a pen on her cluttered desk, "Mark, I understand your diligence and I genuinely appreciate it. But, they're Thorntons. Their family," she reminded me unnecessarily, "keeps this entire place afloat, you know that. We just need to manage them carefully. Try to steer them gently." She strongly advised me not to make waves unless it was absolutely, undeniably necessary. Her carefully chosen words chilled me far more than Blake's casual, cruel insults. Manage them? It felt much more like constantly appeasing them, desperately placating them, essentially allowing them to get away with numerous minor infractions and instances of blatant disrespect simply because of their powerful name and vast family money. The pervasive sense of unease I'd been feeling rapidly grew into genuine, gnawing anxiety. I felt like I was helplessly watching a devastating slow-motion car crash unfold before my very eyes, utterly powerless to hit the brakes. They were careless, profoundly entitled, and completely frustratingly shielded by their immense wealth and pervasive influence. What I constantly worried would happen if they caused real, serious damage. The terrifying thought lingered constantly in my mind now, a persistent dark shadow at the very edge of my carefully curated, once orderly world. I began to meticulously, secretly document everything in a small, unassuming private notebook, noting down even minor incidents, precise times, dates, who exactly was present, just in case. A little insurance policy, I tried to tell myself. But I still didn't truly grasp the terrifying depths of their ingrained recklessness, or just how far they were genuinely, callously willing to go to protect themselves from any and all consequences. The situation escalated from a persistent, simmering unease to a full-blown, catastrophic crisis with a speed that left me reeling, transitioning from subtle microaggressions to a major, shocking breach of gallery protocol. It began with a demand delivered not through any official channels or even routed through my supervisor, Amelia, but directly from Blake Thornton himself, his arrogance palpable. He cornered me alone in the gallery's small, cramped administrative office one evening as I was attempting to finish up some overdue paperwork. He started with an overly familiar "Mark, buddy," leaning casually and deliberately against the doorframe, effectively blocking my only exit, that familiar, deeply infuriating smirk playing on his lips. He informed me that they needed a little favor. The deceptively friendly tone immediately set off loud alarm bells in my head. I instinctively tensed, slowly putting down my pen. I asked, my voice carefully, deliberately neutral, betraying none of the cold dread coiling tightly in my gut, "What kind of favor, Blake?" He continued, pausing to idly inspect his perfectly manicured nails as if he were merely discussing the weather, that Chloe and he were having some friends over on Friday night. "Important people," he added with a significant look. "Potential future donors, you know the type. They thought," he drawled, "it would be impressive to give them a private tour of the main exhibition hall. After hours. You know," he emphasized, "exclusive access." My stomach plummeted like a stone. An after-hours, completely unsanctioned event? With Blake and Chloe in charge? It was an absolute, undeniable recipe for disaster. I told him, "Blake, I can't possibly authorize that. You know the gallery is strictly, unequivocally closed after 8 p.m. There are rigid security protocols, massive insurance liabilities. Mr. Sterling," I insisted, "would never approve something like this." He cut me off with a sharp, impatient wave of his hand. "Details, details," he scoffed. "He told me not to worry my pretty little head about that kind of stuff. They just needed someone on the inside to overlook things. To let them in quietly through the side door around 10, and to make sure the lights were on in the main exhibition hall. Keep it quiet. Simple," he assured me. He then lowered his voice slightly, leaning in with a conspiratorial air, adding that his dad knew. He claimed his father had mentioned it to Sterling earlier that day, and that it was all good, apparently. Mentioned it to Sterling? That felt like a blatant, manipulative lie, a tactic transparently designed to pressure me into compliance. Mr. Sterling was meticulous about rules, almost pathologically so. He would never, ever greenlight something like this off the books. I started to protest again, saying I really didn't think. Blake's voice suddenly hardened, the friendly, casual facade dropping completely, instantly replaced by cold, unforgiving steel. He said, "Look, it's happening. Friday night. Either I helped them out, made it smooth, kept it discreet, or," he threatened, "they would tell Sterling I was being difficult and deliberately uncooperative when they tried to arrange this important viewing. Given my position here, he advised me that he wouldn't recommend making enemies of them." The unspoken threat hung heavy and suffocating in the small, suddenly claustrophobic office. It wasn't just about the illicit tour anymore. It was about my job, my entire future at the gallery. I felt utterly, hopelessly trapped. If I refused, Blake would undoubtedly twist the story, painting me as insubordinate or deliberately obstructive, potentially getting me fired, especially given their family's undeniable influence over Mr. Sterling. If I agreed, I'd be knowingly, consciously breaking every single rule I was hired and trusted to uphold, risking my professional integrity and, more importantly, potentially the safety of the irreplaceable artwork I cared so deeply about. I quickly tried calling Amelia on her internal extension, desperately hoping for guidance or some form of backup, but it went straight to her voicemail. I even tried reaching Mr. Sterling directly through the main gallery line, but his increasingly frosty assistant informed me curtly that he was in meetings and would be unavailable for the rest of the evening. The pressure mounted relentlessly, suffocating me. Reluctantly, foolishly, feeling as though I had no other viable option, I caved. I told myself it would be fine. I'd stay late myself, keep an extremely close eye on them, ensure nothing untoward happened, and escort them out promptly. What real choice did I truly have? It felt like being forced to choose between swallowing poison and facing a dagger. I chose the poison, desperately hoping it wouldn't prove fatal. Friday night arrived like a dark, oppressive omen hanging heavy in the humid summer air. Blake, Chloe, and a boisterous group of about 10 of their friends showed up at the designated side entrance around 10 p.m., already loud, flushed with alcohol consumed elsewhere, and clearly in high spirits. The air in the usually pristine service corridor immediately filled with a cloying, overpowering mix of expensive perfume, strong cologne, and the sharp, unmistakable tang of spilled champagne that someone had clearly, defiantly smuggled in despite the strict rules. My repeated, increasingly desperate attempts to enforce even the most basic gallery etiquette, no touching the exhibits, no drinks anywhere near the art, please keep your voices down, were met with open, derisive laughter, playful, unwelcome shoves, and contemptuous, dismissive eye rolls. Chloe trilled, "Relax, Mark," laughing as she playfully, carelessly tapped the solid bronze base of the magnificent Calliope sculpture, the very piece that would soon become the terrifying, tragic center of my unfolding nightmare. She declared it was just bronze, darling, it wasn't going to melt if she touched it. Her casual, blatant disregard sent a cold shiver of apprehension down my spine. I felt physically sick watching them. They posed for an endless stream of selfies, leaning with shocking carelessness against priceless, delicate pedestals, sometimes even casually draping expensive scarves or heavy jackets over smaller, more fragile sculptures. Their voices echoed far too loudly in the cavernous, acoustically sensitive space, shattering the usual reverent silence. My anxiety spiked uncontrollably with every sudden burst of raucous laughter, every telltale clink of a hidden glass bottle, every single time one of them stumbled a little too close to a fragile, irreplaceable piece. I tried desperately to shadow them, to maintain some semblance of order and control, but they kept splitting up, darting unpredictably into different sections of the vast main hall like a pack of unruly, overexcited children on a massive sugar high. It was utter chaos thinly disguised as an exclusive, sophisticated party. Finally, mercifully, around midnight, they began to gather their belongings, still laughing loudly and shoving each other playfully as they stumbled towards the exit. I ushered them out as quickly and efficiently as possible, locking the side door firmly behind them, my entire body thrumming with residual stress and a deep, profoundly unsettling sense of foreboding. I conducted a quick visual sweep of the main hall with my powerful flashlight. Everything looked okay, at least superficially. No obvious, glaring damage jumped out at me in the dim ambient light. Utterly exhausted and wanting nothing more than to put the entire incredibly stressful night far behind me, I headed back down to the quiet, familiar sanctuary of the archive room in the basement to finally finish the cataloging I'd been forced to abandon earlier. I just wanted to focus on my actual work, to restore some semblance of normalcy. The next morning, the devastating discovery was made by the early cleaning crew. The beautiful, elegant Calliope sculpture wasn't just knocked over or slightly damaged. It looked as though someone had taken a heavy, blunt object to it, repeatedly and viciously. Deep, angry gouges scarred the lustrous, polished bronze surface, brutally marring its smooth, flowing curves. One delicate, intricately spiraled arm of the sculpture was snapped clean off, lying forlornly and accusingly on the polished marble floor beside the ravaged main body. It was an act of brutal, senseless destruction. An act of pure violence against art. And then came Mr. Sterling, flanked by the grim-faced security guards, his face a terrifying mask of controlled fury, the trembling finger pointed directly, unequivocally at me. Blake and Chloe were already there, summoned immediately by the frantic gallery staff, looking suitably, theatrically shocked and deeply, profoundly concerned, their faces carefully arranged masks of practiced, convincing innocence. Chloe said, her voice laced with perfectly pitched, utterly fake sympathy, dabbing delicately at a conspicuously dry eye, that they saw Mark near it last night, just before they left. She added that he seemed agitated about something. Stressed. When they left around midnight, she claimed he was still here all alone. Blake nodded gravely, his expression appropriately somber. He stated that Mark was the only one with keys, Mr. Sterling. The only one left in the building. They felt terrible, he added. They trusted him, you know? They thought he was reliable. Their lies were seamless, chillingly perfect, impeccably rehearsed, and delivered with a deeply convincing, almost heartbreaking sincerity. They'd expertly used their chaotic, drunken party as cover, waited until I was safely out of sight, preoccupied in the basement archives, and then, this. Maybe it had been a genuine accident during their drunken, careless revelry that had spiraled terrifyingly out of control, something they then decided to pin on me in a desperate, selfish panic. Or maybe, even more chillingly, it was deliberate, calculated malice, a cruel payback for my previous, unwelcome attempts to enforce the gallery's rules. In the end, it didn't really matter which scenario was true. They'd set the stage perfectly, and I had walked right into their elaborate, incredibly cruel trap. I was suspended immediately, pending a formal investigation that already felt like a completely foregone, predetermined conclusion. My keys, my access card, my vital connection to the world I loved and had worked so hard to be a part of, all confiscated on the spot with cold efficiency. As I walked out of the gallery in a complete daze, past the pitying or openly suspicious glances of my former colleagues, the full, crushing weight of their calculated, monstrous betrayal crashed down hard on me. My career, my painstakingly built reputation, my entire future, all potentially ruined, obliterated by two spoilt, utterly callous rich kids who clearly saw me as nothing more than convenient, easily disposable collateral damage. Anger, hot, fierce, and undeniably righteous, finally began to burn through the numbing, paralyzing shock. They wouldn't get away with this. They couldn't. I absolutely wouldn't let them. Suspension felt like an endless, terrifying free fall into a deep, dark void. Suddenly, the entire carefully constructed structure of my life, the familiar, comforting routine of early mornings spent at the gallery, the quiet, intense focus on researching fascinating art history, the tentative but steady, rewarding steps towards building a real, meaningful career, was just gone. Obliterated. Instantly replaced by suffocating, relentless waves of profound anxiety, by long, agonizing sleepless nights spent staring blankly at the ceiling, and by the constantly, painfully gnawing injustice of the false accusation burning like acid in my gut. My savings were not substantial. I lived, like many people my age, essentially paycheck to paycheck. A new, sharp panic about upcoming rent and mounting bills started to creep insidiously into my thoughts, adding a heavy layer of practical, everyday fear to the already overwhelming emotional turmoil. Friends offered their sympathy, calling and texting well-meaning words of support, but I could sometimes see that tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of doubt in their eyes during video calls, or hear it in the slight, awkward hesitation in their voices. The Thorntons' pervasive influence was undeniable. Their carefully crafted version of events, heavily bolstered by their family's sterling citywide reputation, cast a long, dark, oppressive shadow. Mr. Sterling steadfastly refused to take my increasingly desperate calls, instead routing me through his progressively frosty, unhelpful assistant. Amelia, my once supportive supervisor, sent a brief, carefully worded, utterly non-committal email simply wishing me well during the difficult time, but offering no tangible support, no hint of belief in my innocence. The official internal investigation seemed predetermined from the very start. Security logs conveniently confirmed I was indeed the last authorized person in the building that fateful night. Blake and Chloe, presented as paragons of virtue from the city's most beloved founding family, provided tearful, incredibly convincing witness statements detailing my supposed agitation and suspicious behavior near the sculpture just before they claimed to have peacefully departed. To make matters exponentially worse, they even found a small specialized chisel from the restoration lab lying innocuously near the base of the damaged sculpture, a tool I occasionally used for very careful, delicate cleaning work, but one I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt I had securely locked away in its designated drawer that night. Planted evidence. It was almost too perfect, too chillingly neat. Despair threatened to swallow me whole on more than one occasion during those first few agonizing, isolating days. It felt like futilely fighting an invisible, all-powerful giant. But underneath the crushing fear and the suffocating sense of utter helplessness, that small ember of righteous, burning anger still glowed stubbornly, refusing to be extinguished. They actually thought they could just crush me, casually discard me, and simply walk away without facing any consequences whatsoever? They had seriously, profoundly underestimated me. They clearly saw me as the little guy, the quiet, unassuming gallery assistant, easily disposable and completely voiceless. They didn't realize that my quiet, observant nature hid a meticulous, highly analytical mind and a deep-seated, unshakable sense of right and wrong that simply couldn't let this monstrous injustice stand. They'd effectively destroyed my present, irrevocably tarnished my name, but I was fiercely determined that I wouldn't let them dictate my future. I started forcing myself to think logically, methodically, pushing past the overwhelming, crippling emotion. I began meticulously piecing together every single minute detail I could possibly recall from that disastrous, chaotic Friday night. The specific, thumping, almost visceral bass line of the loud music they had played incessantly on a portable speaker. The distinctive dark green bottle of the incredibly expensive champagne Chloe had been drinking, which she'd carelessly, almost contemptuously left on a nearby windowsill for a moment. The nervous, almost frightened giggle of one of their younger friends, a young woman I vaguely remembered as Tiffany, who had seemed genuinely, visibly uncomfortable with Blake and Chloe's increasingly rowdy, out-of-control behavior as the night wore on. My mind replayed Chloe tapping the sculpture with dismissive disdain, Blake leaning far too close to another incredibly fragile piece while loudly, boastfully telling some vulgar story. It wasn't much solid, irrefutable evidence yet, but it was a start, precious threads to begin pulling on. Then a crucial, pivotal memory surfaced, hitting me with sudden, startling clarity. While they were all concentrated in the main exhibition hall, making an absolute racket near the Calliope sculpture, I'd briefly stepped into the adjacent, much quieter contemporary art wing, a less visited, almost forgotten section, to check if a light had been accidentally left on. And from there, through the wide, open connecting archway, I distinctly vividly remembered hearing a sharp, distinct, metallic crash, followed immediately by muffled, frantic laughter and a sharp, urgent shoo sound, definitely, undeniably coming from the precise direction of the Calliope sculpture. At the time, completely lost in my own rising anxiety about their chaotic presence, I had foolishly dismissed it as just more drunken antics, perhaps someone dropping a phone or a glass bottle. But now, in this new, terrifying context, it felt incredibly, chillingly significant. The main hall's primary security cameras were undeniably state-of-the-art, installed very recently at great expense. Blake, being a Thornton and intimately familiar with the gallery's layout, likely knew their exact angles and any potential blind spots. He might have even sweet-talked or, more likely, pressured someone in the security department to temporarily disable them during their illicit party, or even more plausibly to conveniently delete the relevant, incriminating footage afterwards. It would have been laughably easy for them. But the Thornton Gallery was an old, sprawling building, a labyrinthine, confusing patchwork of various architectural styles and numerous technological upgrades implemented over many decades. What about the other, older, perhaps forgotten security systems? The less obvious, less reliable ones? I suddenly, with a jolt, remembered the older, somewhat antiquated motion-activated security cameras that had been installed years ago in the adjoining wings, including the very contemporary wing I'd briefly stepped into. They were notoriously unreliable, sometimes glitchy, and annoyingly prone to frequent false activations. Gallery management generally considered them secondary backup at best, barely, if ever, monitored. Maybe, just maybe, the Thorntons didn't even know or particularly care about their existence, focusing all their attention only on disabling the main, obvious high-tech cameras. And then there was the gallery's public Wi-Fi network. Every single connection, every digital interaction, leaves a traceable digital footprint. Maybe, just maybe, someone at that disastrous party had been incredibly careless, posting something online they absolutely shouldn't have. It felt like an incredibly long shot, like desperately grasping at fragile straws in a hurricane. Getting any kind of access to the gallery's internal systems now that I was suspended and effectively locked out was completely impossible through any official channels. But I knew the gallery's main IT guy, Kevin. We weren't exactly close friends, but we'd bonded occasionally, sharing a mutual weary frustration with the gallery's perpetually outdated administrative software and its endless bureaucratic hurdles. He was quiet, generally unassuming, and typically kept his head down, but I sensed he didn't fully, unquestioningly buy the official story about my supposed guilt either. He'd personally witnessed the Thorntons' appalling, entitled behavior firsthand on many occasions. Taking a huge, potentially disastrous risk, knowing it could backfire spectacularly and permanently ruin any chance I had, I contacted Kevin through a secure, personal, encrypted messaging app. I laid out my entire desperate situation honestly, meticulously explaining my profound suspicions, and appealed directly to his innate sense of fairness and his intimate, detailed knowledge of the gallery's complex digital underbelly. After a tense, agonizing silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity, he finally replied. He cautiously agreed to help. He stressed he couldn't grant me any direct access or do anything that would obviously, traceably link back to him, but he could discreetly check the server logs for the older camera footage archives and scrutinize the Wi-Fi connection records from that specific Friday night, during off hours when no one else would be around. A few agonizing, nerve-wracking days later, a new message from Kevin suddenly popped up on my phone. He wrote that he got something potentially useful. A motion cam in the East Wing archives. Bad angle, super grainy, infrared mode. But, he added, the timestamp matched exactly when I told him I heard that distinct crash. He then attached a small, heavily encrypted video file. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic, trapped drum as I nervously downloaded and then opened the file. The footage was indeed of very poor quality, dark and flickering intermittently, capturing only a very narrow, obscured sliver of the main hall visible through an open doorway at the far end of the archive corridor. But it was enough. Chillingly, damningly enough. It clearly showed Blake Thornton stumbling backwards forcefully, a dark liquid visibly spilling from a cup clutched in his hand, as he collided hard with something large just out of the camera's direct line of sight, precisely the known location where the magnificent Calliope sculpture had stood. Then mere seconds later, it showed Chloe rushing over, her frantic, hushed whispering clearly audible even on the low-quality, muffled audio track, her entire body language exuding pure panic. And crucially, before they both straightened up and attempted to look nonchalant and composed, the grainy footage caught Blake quickly, almost furtively, tucking something small and distinctly metallic, something that glinted briefly and unmistakably in the dim ambient light, into the inner pocket of his expensive tailored jacket. Tiffany, the nervous younger friend, could be seen hovering anxiously nearby, looking utterly horrified, before Blake shot her a sharp, silencing glare. It wasn't crystal clear footage of the actual destruction itself, not the absolute, irrefutable smoking gun I craved. But it undeniably placed both Blake and Chloe, acting incredibly suspiciously and highly secretively, at the exact location and the exact time the devastating damage most likely occurred. It directly, powerfully contradicted their sworn, notarized statements about leaving peacefully and uneventfully while I was supposedly still working elsewhere in the building. But the real bombshell, the single explosive piece of evidence that made my breath catch sharply in my throat and my pulse race, came from Kevin's subsequent painstaking check of the Wi-Fi logs and some incredibly clever, intricate digital sleuthing he performed based on the partial guest list I vaguely remembered. Tiffany, the nervous young friend caught glancing their way in the grainy security footage, had apparently posted a very short, seemingly innocuous video clip to her private, friends-only social media story that very night, presumably before the full, terrifying gravity of the situation had truly sunk in. A clip, Kevin meticulously explained, that clearly showed Blake Thornton laughing maniacally, almost hysterically, holding up a broken, gleaming piece of bronze, unmistakably, undeniably the missing spiral arm of the Calliope sculpture, like some kind of bizarre, grotesque, drunken trophy before Chloe, her face a mask of fury and dawning panic upon realizing Tiffany was recording, slapped his hand down hard and hissed furiously, inaudibly at him to put it down immediately. Tiffany had, predictably and understandably, deleted the incredibly incriminating clip very quickly, probably the very next morning when the shocking news of the vandalism broke across the city. But Kevin, using some sort of advanced IT wizardry involving complex network traffic analysis and cache data recovery techniques that I didn't even pretend to fully understand, had miraculously managed to find and retrieve a perfect, pristine copy of that deleted video file. There it was. Undeniable. Irrefutable. Indisputable proof. Blake Thornton, holding the clear, damning evidence of his destructive, wanton act, caught completely red-handed on camera by one of his own unsuspecting friends. Their hidden guilt, their ugly, festering secret brutally exposed by their own staggering, almost unbelievable recklessness, their profound arrogance, and the careless digital trails they hadn't even bothered to try and cover. A powerful surge of pure, vindicating adrenaline coursed intensely through me, decisively chasing away the last vestiges of despair. This wasn't just enough to finally, completely clear my name anymore. This was more than enough to bring them crashing down hard and spectacularly from their lofty, undeserved pedestal. Now, I just needed the perfect dramatic stage for the grand public reveal. And I knew exactly, precisely when and where that would be. The Thornton Gallery's glittering, ostentatious annual benefactors gala, scheduled just 2 short weeks away. The single biggest, most high-profile, most ostentatiously prestigious social event of the entire city's art scene. Their chosen, beloved stage for shamelessly flaunting their immense power and unearned prestige was about to become mine. The Benefactors Gala was the Thornton Gallery's absolute, undisputed pinnacle event of the entire year. It was a dazzling night of glittering, expensive designer gowns, veritable rivers of even more expensive champagne, endless self-congratulatory speeches about lofty philanthropy and visionary artistic insight, and, most importantly for the gallery's precarious bottom line, the crucial securing of enormous multi-million-dollar donations from the city's wealthiest, most influential patrons. It was also the very night the powerful Thornton family traditionally, publicly cemented their elevated status as the undisputed leaders and primary benefactors of the local arts community. Blake and Chloe would undoubtedly be there, preening and posing alongside their influential, beaming parents, shamelessly basking in the reflected, unearned glory. Mr. Sterling would certainly be there, obsequiously, sickeningly praising the family's unwavering, unparalleled generosity. The city's entire social and financial elite would be present, dressed to the nines, eager to see and be seen. It was, without a doubt, the perfect high-stakes, high-visibility venue for my carefully planned revelation. Getting inside the heavily secured event wasn't going to be easy. My ongoing suspension meant I was officially persona non grata, strictly barred from the premises. But Kevin, my unlikely and incredibly brave, invaluable ally from the gallery's IT department, came through for me yet again. He knew the complex, intricate logistics of the event staffing inside and out. He managed, through some remarkably clever, subtle manipulation of the temporary event staff roster, to get me a legitimate, official temporary event pass, expertly disguised as an assistant to one of the external specialist lighting technicians hired specifically for the evening. It meant wearing a drab, ill-fitting, anonymous gray uniform and staying mostly behind the scenes, confined to the less glamorous, bustling service corridors, but crucially, it got me inside the building legally and provided me with a plausible reason to be near the essential technical equipment. The night of the gala finally arrived, the very air thick with palpable anticipation and the overwhelming, sweet scent of thousands of expensive floral arrangements. I slipped in quietly through a bustling, chaotic service entrance, my heart pounding against my ribs like a frantic, trapped bird. The main exhibition hall, where the tragically absent, lamented Calliope sculpture once stood, now conspicuously, almost guiltily replaced by a much less significant, far safer abstract piece, was already rapidly filling with elegantly dressed, chattering people, their animated conversation and tinkling laughter echoing loudly off the polished marble floors. I quickly caught sight of Blake and Chloe positioned near the main stage area, confidently holding court with a large, fawning group of admirers, laughing easily, looking utterly, infuriatingly untroubled and positively radiant. Their sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking arrogance was infuriating, almost physically nauseating, but it also solidified my wavering resolve like expertly tempered steel. I had the crucial, damning video files, the grainy but still damning security footage from the East Wing and Tiffany's explosive, undeniable social media clip, loaded securely onto a small, unassuming, encrypted USB drive, which felt as if it were burning a hole in the pocket of my borrowed, uncomfortable uniform trousers. Kevin had subtly, ingeniously ensured that the main audiovisual presentation system, controlled from a small, dimly lit, easily overlooked tech booth tucked away discreetly at the back of the main hall, had an easily accessible, clearly marked auxiliary input port I could potentially use if I somehow got the chance. The plan was incredibly, terrifyingly risky, relying heavily on precise timing and a very large dose of sheer luck. I needed the perfect moment, a significant, noticeable pause in the formal proceedings, a specific point where maximum attention was naturally, completely focused on the stage and the enormous projection screen prominently displayed behind it. The formal program began. Speeches droned on, predictably. Mr. Sterling took the podium first, eloquently lauding the gallery's recent valuable acquisitions and exciting upcoming exhibitions, very carefully, pointedly avoiding any direct mention of the recent unpleasantness. Then the main event, Blake and Chloe's father, Mr. Thornton Sr., a man radiating immense wealth and an almost suffocating self-importance, stepped confidently up to the microphone to formally announce the family's major, highly anticipated annual donation. He spoke glowingly at length about the vital importance of nurturing the next generation's deep love for the arts, pointedly, meaningfully mentioning his own beloved children's burgeoning, enthusiastic interest in taking on significant leadership roles at the gallery in the very near future. He even made a vague, incredibly carefully worded reference to the unfortunate recent incident involving the damaged sculpture, smoothly, seamlessly praising the gallery's swift and decisive handling of the delicate matter, a clear, coded, public reinforcement of my supposed guilt and unceremonious dismissal. That was my cue. My blood ran cold for a fleeting second, then surged hot and fierce with pure, righteous indignation. As Mr. Thornton paused theatrically, smiling benevolently, waiting for the expected thunderous round of appreciative applause to gradually die down, visibly basking in the warm, adoring glow of the powerful spotlight, I made my move. Slipping silently past a momentarily distracted, bored-looking security guard stationed near the entrance to the tech booth, I moved quickly and quietly inside. Locating the auxiliary port Kevin had so clearly described, I decisively plugged the USB drive in. Kevin had cleverly prepped a simple, utterly foolproof interface. I just needed to select my crucial file and hit play, at the exact, perfect instant. Mr. Thornton cleared his throat, beaming proudly, ready to continue his self-aggrandizing speech. He began, his voice resonant with practiced, effortless charm, that now he'd like to invite his wonderful children, Blake and Chloe, up to say a few words about their exciting vision for. He never finished that sentence. Because suddenly, shockingly, the massive projection screen dominating the entire wall behind him, which had, just moments before, been displaying the gallery's elegant, understated logo, flickered abruptly, violently. Instead of the familiar logo, the grainy, unsettling infrared footage from the East Wing motion camera suddenly, starkly filled the entire screen, huge and undeniable. A collective, audible gasp rippled intensely through the previously attentive, hushed crowd. People craned their necks, their initial confusion rapidly morphing into intense, almost palpable curiosity. Murmurs started spreading like wildfire through the stunned hall. From my hidden vantage point inside the tech booth, I saw Blake and Chloe freeze instantly, mid-step towards the stage, their practiced, confident smiles evaporating completely, replaced by expressions of sheer, dawning horror. Their father, Mr. Thornton Sr., stared, utterly bewildered and aghast, at the screen that was now shockingly showing his own son stumbling drunkenly, carelessly, near the sculpture's known location, acting incredibly suspiciously. Before anyone in charge could possibly react, before the gallery's security team could figure out what was happening or where it was coming from, I swiftly, decisively switched the video feed. Now Tiffany's shaky but much clearer, infinitely more damning phone video filled the giant screen. There was Blake, laughing like a wild hyena, triumphantly, grotesquely holding the broken bronze arm of the Calliope sculpture aloft like some kind of bizarre, drunken, conquering warrior displaying a spoil of war. Then Chloe, her face contorted in raw, unfiltered panic, suddenly realizing Tiffany was recording, slapping his hand down violently and hissing something sharp, urgent, and inaudible at him. But the audio track, though somewhat muffled by the loud background party noise, was just clear enough to unmistakably catch Blake slurring his next fatally damning words. Oops. Guess Mark will have fun explaining this one. Silence. Absolute, stunned, suffocating silence descended heavily on the entire gala. Every single eye in that vast, opulent hall was glued, transfixed, to the horrifying screen, then darted downwards in unison towards Blake and Chloe on the floor level, whose faces had completely drained of all color, turning a sickly, ghastly pale under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the bright stage lights. Chloe looked as though she was about to physically collapse onto the expensive carpet. Blake opened and closed his mouth repeatedly like a landed fish gasping for water, sputtering incoherently, but no discernible sound came out. Their parents, standing frozen near the edge of the stage, looked utterly, profoundly horrified, raw disbelief warring fiercely with the sickeningly, rapidly dawning comprehension on their ashen faces. Mr. Sterling, who had been standing near the stage looking immensely pleased and self-satisfied just moments before, went completely rigid, his face transforming into a mask of profound, utter shock and then dawning, incandescent fury, but this time, finally, mercifully, directed squarely at the right people. Mr. Thornton Sr. finally choked out, whirling around, his voice trembling with barely controlled, explosive rage. What is the meaning of this outrage? His eyes scanned the hall frantically, desperately searching for the source of the catastrophic disruption, finally, inevitably landing on the shadowed tech booth. But before security could converge on my position, I deliberately stepped out from the protective shadows of the booth, slowly pulling off the borrowed technician's cap so my face was clearly visible to everyone. My voice, unexpectedly amplified slightly but effectively by the still-active main microphone system, cut cleanly, sharply through the thick, stunned, almost unbreathable silence. "The meaning, Mr. Thornton," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady, resonant, despite the potent adrenaline coursing through my veins like powerful electricity, "is the truth. The truth your children tried so desperately, so callously to bury. Your son and daughter, I declared for all to hear, destroyed the Calliope sculpture during their unauthorized, reckless, drunken party. And then," I continued, my voice rising with conviction, "they deliberately and maliciously framed me, an innocent, hard-working employee, solely to cover up their own despicable crime." I held up the small, innocuous USB drive, making absolutely sure that people in the crowd, especially those near the front, could clearly see it. "This," I announced, "is the irrefutable evidence they and perhaps others complicit in the gallery's administration tried so desperately to suppress. Evidence," I concluded firmly, "that unequivocally proves their guilt and completely, finally clears my name." The fallout was immediate, chaotic, and utterly, spectacularly devastating. Blake started shouting frantic, incoherent denials, laced with panicked, vulgar curses. Chloe burst into loud, hysterical, uncontrollable tears, burying her face in her hands. Their father lunged aggressively towards the tech booth, shouting loudly about security, trying desperately, futilely to regain control of the rapidly imploding narrative, demanding angrily that the screen be turned off immediately, but the damage was irrevocably, catastrophically done. The crowd erupted in a veritable maelstrom of shocked murmurs, pointed, contemptuous whispers, audible gasps of disbelief, and scores of disapproving, disgusted glares. Phones were out everywhere, hundreds of them, recording the incredibly dramatic, unfolding scene, capturing the Thorntons' very public, very humiliating implosion for posterity. The carefully constructed, generations-old facade of the Thornton family's unquestioned respectability and benevolent patronage crumbled spectacularly in real time, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the very spotlights they so desperately, consistently craved. Security did eventually reach me and escorted me firmly but not roughly out of the suddenly chaotic hall through a quiet side exit. But not before several influential board members and major longtime patrons intercepted me briefly near the door, their expressions conveying a potent mixture of sincere sympathy for me and palpable, undisguised disgust towards the entire Thornton family. Mr. Sterling, looking utterly betrayed, deeply ashamed, and suddenly aged by at least a decade, simply met my eyes directly as I passed him and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a silent, profound acknowledgement of the undeniable truth, and perhaps, a reluctant admission of his own glaring failure to see it, or to act upon it sooner. The truth was finally, irrevocably out. The hidden, festering guilt, concealed for weeks beneath thick layers of unearned privilege and arrogance, was finally brutally, satisfyingly exposed for all the world to see. The profound satisfaction washing over me wasn't just simple relief. It was the potent, clean, sharp-edged, almost intoxicating feeling of justice served ice cold, right in the glittering, hypocritical heart of their carefully constructed, now shattered, gilded world. The aftermath of the gala was swift, merciless, and devastatingly brutal for the entire Thornton family. The video clips, both the irrefutable evidence I had displayed and the numerous candid recordings of the family's subsequent, very public meltdown captured by dozens of gala attendees' phones, went viral within mere hours, spreading through the city's interconnected, gossipy social circles like an unstoppable wildfire. The scandalous story quickly leaped from whispered gossip columns to the prominent front pages of local news outlets, and then rapidly gained significant traction in respected national art publications and even prominent mainstream news sites. The narrative spun completely, irrevocably out of their desperate control, becoming not just a sad story about a piece of damaged art, but a potent, resonant symbol of unchecked, arrogant privilege, blatant, calculated deceit, and the callous, almost sociopathic attempt to destroy an innocent person's life and livelihood. Blake and Chloe faced immediate, severe, and very public consequences. The gallery's board of directors, under immense, unrelenting pressure from outraged donors, furious artists whose work the gallery represented, and the deafening public outcry significantly amplified by social media, demanded swift, visible accountability. Criminal charges for vandalism and possibly even perjury weren't ultimately pressed. The family's team of high-powered, expensive lawyers likely managed to negotiate that unfortunate outcome away with a hefty, discreet, out-of-court financial settlement paid directly to the gallery to cover the full insured value of the sculpture, extensive restoration costs, and substantial additional damages. But the social fallout was immense, widespread, and utterly crippling. They became instant, reviled pariahs in the very elite circles they once so effortlessly, arrogantly dominated. Invitations to exclusive events dried up completely overnight. Former close friends suddenly, consistently avoided their calls. Contemptuous whispers and openly disapproving glances followed them everywhere they dared to venture in the city. Their once golden reputations, previously burnished and protected by their powerful family name, were shattered, quite possibly irrevocably. Mr. Thornton Sr. was reluctantly forced by the gallery board and overwhelming public pressure to issue a groveling, deeply humiliating public apology, weakly emphasizing youthful indiscretion and profound, heartfelt remorse, a statement which rang hollow and insincere to most observers. He also had to make an additional, exceptionally large restorative donation to the gallery, an amount far exceeding their usual substantial annual contribution. A gesture clearly motivated by desperate, panic damage control rather than any genuine philanthropic spirit. His own considerable influence within the city's tightly knit cultural and financial institutions waned significantly and noticeably in the following months. Even Mr. Sterling, to my surprise, sent me a formal, personal letter of profound apology, acknowledging the gallery's egregious mishandling of the entire situation and graciously offering me my job back, along with substantial back pay for the entire period of my unjust suspension and even a surprising, unsolicited promotion to a more senior curatorial role. I politely but firmly and without hesitation declined the offer to return. While the public vindication felt incredibly, deeply validating, the entire traumatic experience had irrevocably, permanently tainted the Thornton Gallery for me. The painful memory of the false accusation, the sharp, lingering sting of the initial shocking lack of support from colleagues and superiors I had once respected and trusted. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't go back and simply pretend everything was normal, working every day under the heavy, oppressive shadow of that profound betrayal. However, the very public exposure of the unvarnished truth, and my somewhat reluctant but necessary role in revealing it, did unexpected, wonderful things for my professional reputation elsewhere in the art world. Several rival galleries and prestigious, internationally recognized museums reached out to me, intrigued by the widely publicized story and genuinely impressed by my demonstrated integrity and resilience under extreme pressure. Ultimately, I accepted an exciting, challenging new position as an assistant curator at a highly respected, truly independent museum in another major, vibrant city, a place known internationally for its unwavering curatorial rigor, its impeccable ethical standards, and its primary dedicated focus purely on art and serious scholarship, not just on obsequiously catering to wealthy, often fickle socialite patrons. It felt like a genuine fresh start, a significant, well-earned step up, achieved the hard way, forged through intense adversity. As a small, satisfying footnote, I later heard through the art world grapevine that Kevin, my crucial, brave IT ally, actually received a quiet but significant promotion and a well-deserved raise at the Thornton Gallery several months after my departure. It turns out, sometimes courageously exposing corruption, even discreetly from the background, can eventually, deservedly be rewarded when the dust finally settles. Looking back now, from the secure, fulfilling perspective of my new life and thriving career, the whole terrible ordeal feels almost surreal, like a particularly vivid, disturbing nightmare from which I finally awoke. It was a harrowing, deeply unfair chapter, forged in the fiery crucible of unearned, arrogant entitlement and breathtaking, casual carelessness, a stark and terrifying reminder of how easily unchecked power and immense wealth can be ruthlessly wielded to crush those perceived as weaker, less important, or simply in the way. But enduring it and actively fighting back against it also taught me a level of resilience and profound inner strength I never, ever knew I possessed. Standing up for myself when no one else would, meticulously, painstakingly gathering the hidden truth, and strategically, bravely fighting back against profound, overwhelming injustice, even when the odds seemed impossibly, overwhelmingly stacked against me. That difficult, arduous process was its own form of profound, lasting reward. The deep, abiding satisfaction wasn't just rooted in seeing Blake and Chloe finally face tangible, meaningful consequences for their despicable actions, though that certainly felt like a necessary vital balancing of the scales, like karma delivered with satisfying, laser-like precision. The truest, most enduring satisfaction came from successfully reclaiming my own stolen narrative, from fiercely, successfully defending my hard-won integrity, and ultimately from regaining complete, empowering control over my own future. The Thorntons' hidden, ugly guilt was exposed to the entire world, yes, but more importantly, through that intense, painful struggle, my own quiet, previously untested strength was revealed, most importantly to myself. And that hard-won, precious peace, that deeply, profoundly satisfying sense of control finally, fully regained, is ultimately worth far more than any priceless, inanimate sculpture.